Hello again, I'm Greg. So, this is part two of the final section, section four, of our journey through modern hermeneutics. And here we're going to look at the way that in the 20th century, by the mid 20th century, phenomenology within hermeneutics is moving forward into what we have referred to as dialogic hermeneutics. And we want to today distinguish a couple of concepts that make that movement possible: the at hand and the in hand. And I'm going to use a couple of very kind of basic examples in the social scene to talk about the social world, which we're starting with, and that is first dates and casual sex. These are things that are obviously of interest to young people, less so to older people, but as many of us will know, getting back in the dating sort of market, if you will, at even over 30 is a huge challenge and full of risks. And in some ways, I think more and more people are sort of realizing that okay, this is not the ideal thing to be doing. At the same time, it's an adventure and it's full of thrills and a lot of potential. And so there's good points to it, there's negative points to it, and how that gets translated into our sensibilities about this aspect of the social world and about the social world in general has to do not so much with weighing positives and negatives, but the distinction that's made in phenomenology, and specifically in social phenomenology, between the at hand and the in hand. Okay, we've already seen how dialogue, both and interpretation, are necessary to this human endeavor of encountering the world in all of its forms. We undertake to comprehend meaning first, then, in positive self-understanding, digest and absorb the meaningfulness of each encounter. Even the commonplace greetings of the everyday and wide-awake world in the social world contain the edge of authenticity. If I ask, "How are you?" I am not only utilizing the epistemological sense, the how of things, as in how we know what we know, but as well the more deeply the ontological, how are you? Okay, that word. As in, how is it that you exist as you do right now? We usually intend neither of these essential senses during the course of the mundane realm. Okay, so if I'm asking you, how are you, I'm not thinking about epistemology, let alone ontology, but the point is both of them are present. Okay? The fact that our language betrays itself from the moment we utter our first words to the other, whether she is intimate or strange to us, is most telling. We are out to understand the very presence and constitution of another person. This presence, at first, objects to my own. This is one aspect of the phenomenological inquiry regarding a human being's present to world as another being, but not as another form of being. Okay? She is another human being, which means she is other, but she is not an other form of being. Okay? Not an alien life form, if you will. This presence subjects me to its own interrogative. In this there is a balance, for I have done the same to her, if you will, as it were, objecting to and subjecting to, and all at once. The thinghood of the other answers to the first. Her personhood answers to the second. What dialogue seeks to avoid from the start is any sense that in so doing, in activating the necessary hermeneutic arcs that I either intend or in fact desire to accomplish, objectifying the other or casting her into some form of subjection, okay? Some form of servitude or even slavery. Rather, the phenomenological terms we are looking for here are, in fact, objectitude, okay, it's an unfamiliar term, and, of course, subjectitude. These denote states of being which do not depart from authenticity of Dasein's very presence as an own-most. Okay, this is something where sometimes in the casual expression people will say, well, we need to own our actions, we need to own our deeds, we need to own ourselves. We do own ourselves. We may not always own up to it, but nevertheless, we are always who we are, and it is us that is acting. Okay, so when a philosopher talks about own most, they're talking about an ipsissimus present to itself. Okay, ipsissimus is just very ownness, or very own, most present to itself, presented to another as both an object in the world of object and as a person in the social world. So let's look at objectitude first. It's first granted by the other in each social encounter, and thence I must maintain it, more or less on my own. But this is not a strain, for I am, after all, a thing, as well as a consciousness. My body and its extensions, to nod to Kant, are taken more or less at face value, suggesting to the idealist thinker, for one, that such an elemental thinghood must be a member of the rather exclusive club referred to as the universal a prioris. However we may take the notion of either essence, or what is of the essence, it is clear enough that I exist for the other in the very first moment as another object, and then, almost instantly, as a presence which objects more actively to its surroundings. We shall see later on that this objectional aspect or stance of objectitude is what allows us to remain aloof to the world itself. With this basic presence established, my subjectitude then comes into focus, but also into question. Who am I? What do I do? Why am I here? What does my presence mean for her? And so on. Seldom must I directly respond to such a series of questions in the mundane reality of daily social relations, but there are scenes in which a version of these existential queries comes to light and partially to life. Take, for instance, an interview for an employment position, or perhaps one of an early series of dates. My objectitude, though granted, provides me little enough cover to gainsay anything else about me. She can very well see that I am a person like herself, as well as being a consciousness embodied. This embodiment, which is for the philosopher a strictly phenomenological disposition with no metaphysical implications, right? This is a contrast, of course, to say how a theologian would understand the term, provides in itself the basis for my objection to the other and also to her probing. And yet I, as a subjectitudinal being, welcome and indeed require of her that she ask and ask away. At this juncture, the hermeneutic interplay of dialogue can commence. I affirm that I am both a sovereign subject and yet am willing to be subjected to her presence as an interlocutor of another aspect of our shared world. Within the ambit of the social world, this dialogue is at first a simple affair. Indeed, we would not have even met if we did not already share much. This sharedness is of a topographical suasion, if we recall Alfred Schutz's imagery of a contour-lined map of the regions of waking consciousness and thus social reality. The conversation, amicable and with much presumed, can carry on in this lighter vein. We are both participating in one another's at-handedness. It is only later, if our dialogue progresses and deepens, that we may begin to tread upon a more intimate space, that of in-handedness. Okay, so here's our two key concepts of today. First, being expressed and contrasted. The at-handedness is more about the other person as an object. The in-handedness is about her as a person, as we come to know the other more intimately. What is at hand, of course, is what populates the region of what we know to exist, but where we ourselves have no special skills or interests. For the time being, I remain at hand only, to this or that other, and I should think to take no offense to this, for she too is present only in this same manner for me, and in placing her so, and perhaps keeping her at arm's length, as is said, I intend no willing misrecognition of either her personhood or her very psyche. Even so, without interpretation as an active agent within dialogue, I would inevitably slide into objectifying this other, downplaying her sheer otherness as person to my person, in and to my face, to take up Heidegger's sense of the confrontational aspect of interpersonal encounter, as well as, more radically, one's encounter with the world. Okay? He very often exhibits this by using in the face of, okay, as a phrase, or some other phrase like it. And then we are also giving too much credit to her presence as an overall thing. To provide a brief sidetrack, the fashion model's presence lies in her skilled use of thingness. She is not to be taken as a person at all, but however well coiffed and appointed my interlocutor may be, and even if my nascent distraction by her beauty is indeed part of the very encounter she seeks to initiate, this must also immediately pass, for it was intended by her as only one moment of a calling card, as it were, and though it must be recognized, yes, it then also must be understood only as such. I acknowledge her breathtaking quality and then briskly move on, which is itself a compliment to her. It tells her from the get-go that though I appreciate her efforts to make herself into a holistic presence, which highlights one aspect of her personhood, that I will not be unethically and unusually detained by this presentation of self as object. To be so would be to disparage the very person who was the agent of intent. It would put the object cart before the subject horse. And though there is that moment wherein this was the intent, yes, it must remain momentary, if anything else is to occur at all. What we are to understand, then, using this example, is that the social world impinges and even constructs upon how we first encounter the other. It may be said, in fact, that it is the entire scene, even if two authentic persons attempt to immediately move beyond it. The social world thus authenticates my presence to another. On my part, I have dressed a certain way, perhaps shaved and certainly showered, and I have ensured against bad breath, as well as using this image to remind myself not to come across as gauche. It may well be a different story if I were meeting another male, for instance, but even here I cannot afford to take too many liberties. This first date scenery applies to many social encounters, even if our intents and aspirations differ. Generally, the whole point of a first meeting is to ascertain whether or not there could or even should be a second one. If such is agreeable to both parties, it means rather more than one has passed a first impression examination. More importantly, each of us has managed our personhood in a manner the other can comprehend, and is thence more willing to discover what else may lie ahead. It is the comprehension of this kind of present. It is both a gift, and like, I got a present for Christmas, and also a now, as in this is the present, as in the present time. So there's two meanings to the word present there, which pronounces a movement from the at hand toward the in hand. Of course, we're not quite there yet, right? In the topographic view, if you imagine this contour line map of the regions of consciousness, and this is mundane consciousness, and thus of social reality, there is, at the apex of my ego, the sphere of intimacy. This is the top of the mountain, if you will. Eros may make foray into this space, even on a first date, but to do so risks long-term viability, if that be each other's intent in the first place. To broach such a thing is so far out of place that perhaps oddly, sexual relations are not understood to be anywhere near as radical, for they are not binding in our day, as they may once have been, at least publicly demanded. So, if you have sex on a first date, that's actually much less radical than proposing marriage, for obvious reasons. In pastime, we are at least led to believe that the two of them somehow would always conjugate together. I think this is probably a little bit romantic and unrealistic, but there it is. This sphere where an ego sits, however, in Schutz's image of a contour map, does not admit much else to itself this soon. We do not, in fact, know a casual partner in Eros, but only she is an active object, once again pulling me back to her first presence of herself to my senses. What I remember then from this encounter is her sheer presence as another human being, but not so much as another person, and self-identification. There's nothing ethically amiss with this. What is missing, though, is the identity of the other as a who, rather than as the whatness of her presence and its specifically physiological capabilities. In a word, the hermeneutics of sex, if you will, is itself a distillation of, if as well a retreat into, the divine logos of both transparency and immediacy, and as such can provide little enough aid in the understanding of the human other. Yet early intimacy is worth noting due to its ability to transgress the region of in-handedness, almost overleaping it in order to attain the zone of ego, even if for a short time. I do know something of her, after all, and she of me, that we are both able and willing to cast ourselves upon the table, and that this surface is one of values as well as of desires. We may afterwards question both the value of rapid intimacy and whether or not we have thus devalued any future relationship, but this is not entirely reasonable. After all, I must have valued her sheer presence enough to love her in this immediate and transparent manner, thereby telling her that she is like the goddess who needs no hermeneutic, and, perhaps whimsically enough, offer myself to her as her divine counterpart. In Eros, the human being mimics not so much transcendence, but rather more simply Godhead, for the general lack of dialogue, or even use of language itself in sexual relations, can be taken as a veritable sign of Babel. We ascend, for the time being, without need of either personhood or that which authenticates it. We are merely two beings who are like, and find each other desirable enough, with nothing else at stake, or indeed in hand. Supposing this more carnal scene is delayed some days or even weeks, there remains no foul, as is said. But if it is not to occur for a month or more, may begin to falter in our estimation of whether or not such a friendship or relationship, developing as it is, will be worth our effort in the end. Not that coming to know another has only this one intent, but like everything else about the presentation of selfhood, if we are interpreted as withholding any aspect thereof, certainly including sexual intimacy, we are at risk of losing all. Thus, Eros does yield to the hermeneutic arc, for there is always what occurs afterwards, no matter how compelling the erotic maintained itself during. In this hopefully glowing aftermath, I am taken with a sense that I must strive to understand her, perhaps even at all costs. This is not meant as a mechanism for either assimilation or yet bondage, but rather to know her needs and her desires, the both. Very often it is the erotic content of an incipient personal relationship which first drives the interpretive process, but of course there are many other like agents. Pending circumstance, I may require a professional relation like a lawyer, a logistical one like a mechanic, or simply one ludic, say, if I played myself onto a pickup soccer team. Yet we are reminded that in each kind of relationship within the bounds of the social world, a key aspect of each respectively makes a cameo appearance in all of the others. Eros itself demands a form of professionalism. I do not abuse the other. It remarks upon a logistics. Phew, I really needed that. And it is certainly ludic in its good-natured burlesque. Therefore, differing contexts of social interaction demarcate one another in specific ways, but they do so without completely abandoning their contrasting agencies. This is a most important point to note, for it is the very thing that is made hyperbolic in the life world, and just so, the very thing which is utterly absent in the world itself. Okay? So we've seen a little bit about how the social world functions, and then we can begin, over the next couple of episodes, to contrast it with the life world, the world of symbolic forms and tradition, the world of discourses, the world of art, and also the world itself. We've just noted that one very important point is that these social role overlaps, these expectations of one another, that one might be a satisfactory lover but also not take it too seriously, and also at the same time be professional but also be playful, and all of these things together. And this becomes, in the world of myth, in the world of discourse, hyperbolic. It metastasizes itself. Okay, that's one direction. But if we go in the other direction of the world itself, it disappears completely. And so there's another thing that we can set up as we move forward to think about these forms of world and our experience thereof. Thank you again for listening.